Okay, we will get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you to the students in the class for coming, both in Schaible and online. And thank you to the members of the public who are joining us tonight for our speakers. So welcome to the Arctic Leadership Lecture Series. We're really fortunate to have two justices on the Alaska Supreme Court, Justice Carney and Justice Pate, who Justice Carney is with us here in Schaible and Justice Pate is on Zoom. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read the bios of each of them, and then we'll turn it over to Justice Carney, who will talk with us for a bit, and then we'll turn it over to Justice Pate, who will chat with us for a bit too, and then they'll both field your questions from students and from audience members. And we will wrap up the lecture right around 7 o'clock. We'll take a break, and then students will remain for the rest of class. So let me introduce Justice Carney to you all. She was appointed to the Alaska Supreme Court by Governor Bill Walker in May 2016. She was born and raised in Massachusetts, the oldest of David and Margaret Carney's 5 children. She was a student and athlete in high school and at Harvard Radcliffe College, where she earned an AB in History and Literature in 1983, and also competed on the women's soccer and basketball teams. She returned to Harvard and graduated from law school in 1987 after a year in Seattle as a research assistant. She came to Alaska as a law clerk for Justice J. Rabinowitz in 1987, excited about seeing Fairbanks after her father's stories of his time during the Korean conflict at Big Delta Camp, which is now Fort Greely. After her clerkship, she was hired by then public defender Dana Fabe and worked as an assistant public defender for 10 years in Anchorage, Fairbanks, and interior villages. In 1998, she moved to the Office of Public Advocacy, where in addition to criminal defense and representing parents in child protection cases, she served as a guardian ad litem, represented respondents in guardianship cases, advised assistant public guardians and guardians ad litem, and supervised the Fairbanks office, as well as handling all the North Slope cases in the office. Shortly before her appointment to the court, she received an OPA Litigator of the Year award. Governor Walker cited her work throughout Alaska and nearly 30-year commitment to public service when he appointed her. Throughout her years in Fairbanks, Justice Carney played and coached softball, basketball, and soccer. She volunteered at her children's schools, including twice escorting middle school groups on trips to DC. She was a volunteer judge for many years for the We the People high school civics competition. She served on the Alaska Bar Association's Board of Governors from 2015 until her appointment, and on the Supreme Court's Criminal Pattern Jury Instruction Committee from 2006 to 16. She currently chairs the Child in Need of Aid Rules Committee and co-chairs the Fairness, Diversity, and Equality Committee. She also serves as co-chair and mentor for the Color of Justice Youth Program. She and her husband, Peter Braveman, who is here with us tonight, have been married for 34 years, and have 2 adult children. So thank you again, Justice Carney, for being here tonight. Let me go ahead and introduce Justice Pate before we turn it over to Justice Carney. Justice Jude Pate was born to Rupert and Suzanne Pate in Nuremberg, Germany, where his family was stationed with the U.S. Army. His childhood years were spent primarily in Kansas, and he attended high school in the Netherlands. He earned a journalism degree from the University of Kansas and attended law school at Lewis and Clark Northwestern School of Law in Portland, Oregon. Justice Pate came to Alaska in 1993 and clerked for the chief judge of the Sitka Tribal Court, William Brady. He then served as legal counsel for the Sitka Tribe of Alaska, operated a private law practice, and was an assistant public defender. He was appointed to the Sitka Superior Court in 2018 by Governor Bill Walker. Governor Mike Dunleavy appointed him to the Alaska Supreme Court in 2023. He currently serves on the committees for Fairness, Diversity, and Equality, Newer Judges, Conference Planning, and Workplace Conduct. Justice Pate is married to Christine Pate, and has 2 grown children, William and Joe, and a furry 4-legged Bethel special named Oscar. So with that, we will turn it over to Justice Carney, and then we'll hear from Justice Pate. Thank you.
As of about a month ago, the Chief Justice of the Alaska Supreme Court. I'm the second woman to serve in that capacity. The first one was Dana Fabe, who hired me to be an assistant public defender after I'd been up here for a year working as a law clerk. And a big part of, I guess, my professional trajectory seems to have been following her around. When I came to Alaska, I figured I'd be here for a year and then I would move back to America. And that was in 1987, and I haven't left. I was a public defender and a public advocate, which is really in Alaska just another name for public defender. There are 2 public defender agencies, so that if there's a conflict of interest, if, for example, 2 people hold up a store, they can't have the same lawyer. So one will have an assistant public defender, one will have an assistant public advocate. Between those 2 agencies, I worked about 28 years, and I figured I would work a few more years and retire, but that's not what happened, as you can see. I never wanted to be a judge at any level, but other people had different ideas. And so when Justice Dana Fabe announced her retirement, she was the only woman on the court. And many people said, you should apply, you should apply. And I said, I don't want to. I love my job. I don't want to be a judge. And finally, and you can fact check this with the news miner from earlier this week, after every time I turned around, people like other public defenders, judges, police officers, prosecutors, seemed like everybody I knew and some people I didn't really know said, apply, apply, apply. I said, no. Pete went out to the pagoda. He got way too much Chinese food for the 2 of us, which came with a whole bunch of fortune cookies. And the one I grabbed said, great honor will be bestowed upon you in the coming year. So I said, fine, I will apply. And Governor Walker appointed me. That's probably not a path that you should set out to follow. But what I do think seriously is you should find something that you care deeply about, and you should work toward that. And I think being here, both here in Fairbanks and here in Alaska, gives you more opportunities to get somewhere that you may not be able to get if you are in San Francisco, if you are in some other very big firm, some big city, some big corporate entity. Here, even though we have a whole lot of space, we still don't have a whole lot of people. And if you are working within a particular field, pretty quickly, you are going to know most of the people in the field or know someone who knows everybody else in the field. And I think that's much more doable here than it is in some other places. And I think that people still, to some degree, are able to go further without having long resumes of checking every box of everything that everybody said they needed to do beforehand. I think that Alaska is still a place where people value very much you as a person, as you present, that you come in and you appear to be a competent, dedicated person to the role that you want. And you have experience. I think Alaska gives people some experiences that other people don't have. And that continues to be valued, because maybe less than when it was more of a kind of Wild West, but still there's a feeling that we don't actually care what they do outside. We're going to do it our way, you know, and if it works, great. I keep looking down because I have questions I have to answer. And one of them is, what's my leadership style? I also never set out to be a leader. I never like got up one morning and said, I think I need to be a leader in my field. But I think it just happened. And I don't think it happened just like for no apparent reason. Just, I think if you have a role that you care about, you work at it. You work with the people on your team, the people in your community, and you do it honestly and openly and consistently, and you support the members of your team, suddenly you find that they are supporting you back and you have risen. It may be that my colleague, Justice Pate, has a little more insight on that because, you know, I'm looking at me from inside. I have an idea of how I think people perceive me, but I don't really know that. The question about what challenges am I facing is actually pretty easy. I spent yesterday talking to the legislature about why cases take a long time to get through the system and what we can do about it. One of the things we can do about it is we support Jeffrey May's program of restorative justice. And that is one, you know, everybody going to court and fighting about everything all the time is not always the best solution. And sometimes there are alternative ways to resolve things that don't involve judges in black robes and terrifying courtrooms for people. But our challenge is we have lots and lots of cases and they take too long. We are working hard to make them move more quickly, but we need to do that in a way that protects everybody's rights and is respectful, doesn't just become some kind of assembly line churning people out. The last question is what advice I would give you if you want to become a leader. Be yourself, for one. You have to be honest with people. And if you're not honest with yourself, I don't know how you would accomplish that. The thing we told our kids, which wasn't necessarily about how to be a leader, but just how to be a good person and a good member of a community, was work hard, do your best, and be respectful both of yourself and of the people that you have contact with, no matter who they are. That's pretty simplistic, but I think it works. Alaska is a very, very different place than Worcester, Massachusetts, where I grew up. And so I was constantly in situations that were new and at times intimidating. And I think it helped me to just sort of be open to learning and to respect what people were telling me, even if it seemed weird, which when you come from the Boston area and you find yourself in Anaktuvik Pass, it seemed very different. That's as close as I have to sort of magic words of wisdom for you. And I know that there will be questions later on. And I'm happy to turn this over to Justice Pate in Juneau.
I have been on the Supreme Court for about 2 years, and the person that gave me the most support, I mean, the Supreme Court has an incredible workload. Before I was on the Supreme Court, I worked as a trial judge, and I worked, I don't know, 50, 60, 70-hour weeks. working on the Supreme Court is, I work even harder, I work longer hours, but the work is a joy. But coming in as a new justice, the person who gave me the most support, who showed me the ropes, time in and time out, is Justice Carney. And part of that is because we both, the gravity of most of Alaska is in Anchorage, as you probably know. And so we have to come in most of the times when we're meeting with the rest of the court, the 3 other members of the court. I fly in from Juneau to Anchorage, and Sue comes down from Fairbanks, and we're the out-of-town justices. And so I got to have dinner on a regular basis with Sue and and I can tell you that her leadership style is she leads by example, that she leads with integrity, that she's no nonsense. And I don't know if I've told this to her, but I've described Justice Carney as the conscience of the court, because she's not whatever she thinks is right, that's where it comes down. And I just find that tremendously comforting, exciting, and a little bit in awe. So that's how I would describe Justice Carney's leadership. And to the degree that I have made any headway or positive impact on the Alaska Supreme Court, in large part it's due to Sue. So thank you, Sue. I came to Alaska in 1993, and I had a backpack and a dog and a mountain load of law school debt. And I got to Sitka. A friend told me to come up and come up to Sitka because before I took the bar, I was thinking about staying down in Oregon or Washington, perhaps. I went to Lewis and Clark Law School in Portland. And my belief, and it still is, at that time, when I got out of law school, was that I wanted to do something that was either to work for an Indian tribe or to work for a small farmers association, perhaps in the Midwest, with the theory being that building community and taking care of people, you can start by working with the people who are closest to the land, water, air, and who depend upon it the most. And so I saw that, given indigenous peoples' customary traditional connection, multi-layered connections, spiritual, environmental, physical, emotional, all that, to the land and the animals, the water, that seemed fascinating to me. And because I spent a lot of time in Kansas in the Midwest, I saw that on small farms. And I thought that small farmers associations help build community, as opposed to the big kind of mega corporations where there's crops and kind of not a lot of community built. They bring in money, but so I came out of law school, came up to Sitka because a friend told me to check it out. And I was there for about 2 weeks, didn't have a job. And I'm looking across the Sitka Sound at Mount Edgecombe, and I'm like, I'm staying. And I started, my first job out of law school was not a law job. I worked at Center for Community, which is helping people with disabilities integrate into the community, which felt like a very healthy thing to do after being in law school for 3 years, dealing with all this abstract stuff and not really having hands-on helping somebody. So that was kind of good for the soul. And I started volunteering. So I was getting paid at Center for Community, and I started volunteering at Sitka Tribe. And I just showed up and went into the tribal building and told them I, had a law degree, and I didn't even hadn't passed the bar, and I did fairly quickly after that. But what I started doing research, and after I passed the bar, I started doing drafting ordinances for them and advising them on their gaming codes, like their pull tabs and bingos, and I spent time in their tribal court. And I was at a council meeting, and I gave a presentation on a paper that I had written, a research paper, and it was advising them how to proceed. It was with their Indian gaming, their bingo and pull tabs. And it was pretty detailed. And I got done presenting. I sat down, and it was my first presentation to the council. I sat down, and the general manager stood up, who's the top employee, and the tribal council chairperson said, Mr. General Manager, we really appreciate the young attorney's work, but we're a little bit worried about how much it will cost us, because this is obviously detailed and it took a lot of time. So we need to know what he's charging us. And the general manager kind of looked down at his notes and looked back up and goes, we're not charging him any, he's not charging us anything. He's doing it for free. And the tribal council chairman said, you give him a job. So that's how I got my job. My first law job, I kind of interviewed in live time. I then began clerking for William Brady, who was the chief judge of the Sitka Tribal Court. And the Sitka Tribal Court is, at least back, in the early 90s, was one of the more active tribal courts in Alaska. But mostly what it did was was handling what we know as child in need of aid cases, where the parents are, maybe it's drugs or alcohol or mental illness, or they're in jail and they just can't take care of their kids. Well, the law, fortunately, allows for Indian tribes and tribal courts to handle those matters. Sometimes the state handles them, sometimes the tribe handles them. And in fact, there's a preference in general that if there's Indian children involved, that you're going to have some degree of tribal involvement. And so that's mostly the cases that I helped as the tribal court clerk. So I didn't have, my first clerkship was not at a law firm or at the Alaska Supreme Court or any state court. It was in tribal court. And Bill Brady, the chief judge, he didn't wear a robe. He didn't sit up higher than anybody else. It was like circle justice, like restorative justice. Truly, it was like having your grandfather at the table, a wise grandfather, and the parents would come in, or the relatives, or the care providers, or whoever had been with them to AA or NA or whatever, and you would sit in a circle. And Judge Brady taught me the most important thing about law, and that's fairness, which is another name for that's due process. And he always heard from people that were there. He always gave them a chance to speak. He always made sure that he didn't make a decision until everybody who needed to be heard from had been. And it changed my perspective about, or it added another dimension to my perspective about what being a lawyer could be. And it really, I saw Judge Brady building community, right there in Sitka with the people who needed it the most, that needed that support. And that it really laid bare, it exposed what the most fundamental rule of law is, and that's due process, for at least what I think. Let's see. And I think one of my most, so I was an in-house counsel for 6, 7, 8 years. And it was towards the end of my time of being in-house counsel. And they jokingly, I don't know if you know this, but at least down in Southeast, that you're in a Native community, that they like you if they tease you. And I got teased mercilessly. So I was in-house counsel, but then when I moved to moved to private practice, they called me outhouse counsel, because they continued to be my client. But anyway, before I went into private practice, there was election dispute. And the tribal council, I think there was 4 members of the 9, I think it was, that were up for election, and they all lost. All the incumbents lost. Clean sweep. New people come in. And the incumbents who lost were unhappy that they lost, and they were going to file a lawsuit. They believed that something had gone wrong. And what I found, and this leads to one of my most, I guess, cherished moments, or what I think is significant professionally, is that rather than going to the state court, or where tribes you often go if there's an election dispute, they go to federal court. When I was in private practice, I represented tribes, and there was election disputes, they would go to federal court. But in this instance, the council members who really believed that the incumbents who lost really believed that they had a legitimate beef, they went to tribal court. And I was like, wow, that's real sovereignty. That just made me, because I had been, working. One of my main jobs as an attorney was to help administer the tribal court and develop it, and to make sure everybody got due process. And by that time, Judge Brady had passed on, and the new chief judge was Marie Laws. Judge Laws, great name for a judge. And I was so impressed. She found what the tribal council members who lost were complaining because the ballot boxes had that were used to collect the votes had tape on them, and the election ordinance said you got to have locks, and they didn't have locks. And there was a couple other little things like that. And Judge Laws said, you know what, council members, very respectfully wrote out the decision, announced it orally to the council members at a hearing where there was given notice. And she said, no, you're right that the boxes didn't have locks on them, but they were taped, which basically serves the purpose of a lock. And there's no indications that the tape was torn. And importantly, there's no evidence whatsoever, and there wasn't, that there'd been any tampering or any monkey business with the voting. And then even more impressive than this was like a John Marshall moment, like early Supreme Court justice for the United States defining jurisdiction and all that. Judge Laws then turns to the tribal government, the council now, the ones that are in office, and says, and within 30 days, you will have locks on these boxes and provide proof to me by X, Y, and Z. And I was like, whoa, it was so great. And then the council members who lost abided by the rule. They didn't go to federal court. They lived by it. And some of them in next elections were elected back in. I just saw that as an incredible moment of exercise of sovereignty, self-governance, and that I could even have an indirect role in helping that happen is probably the proudest moment of my career. So I live in Sitka on an island for 30 years, basically. So I stayed in Sitka. I met my wife there, raised my boys there. As you heard, I was in private practice. I was a public defender for about 10 years, judge for 5 years. And what I found in Sitka, an island with 14 miles of road, is that whether I was a public defender or a judge or whatever I was doing, a tribal attorney, I'm seeing the same people. If I'm a public defender, I see my clients and their kids at our baseball games for my kids, or the police officer that I've just cross-examined, or if I was in private practice and I had a tough divorce case that I represented on, I would see both. And so you're dealing with people who you can't just deal with them and then throw them away. They're going to be there in your life. These people are part of your community with nowhere to go, airplane, boat, but generally. And I think that experience helped me as a lawyer always be really careful, or try to be mindful at least. I didn't always succeed, but try to be mindful of how I treated people, whether it was other lawyers or parties or officers or judges or whoever, because I'm going to be in a restaurant with them. I'm going to be at the same swim meet as them with their kids. I'm going to be, I don't know, representing, just the connections go on and on. And so if, for example, when I was a public defender, I would fight hard, zealously for my clients. I would go to the wall for them, but that didn't go as far as to then make it personal against the prosecutor. That I just saw as a red line that I didn't want to cross. So I think that helped inform my approach to the law, my trajectory. And the other, it's going to sound a little bit strange, but I'm going to throw it in there. I love music. I like to play music. I like to write music. I'm in a band that I don't get to play enough with in Sitka anymore because I'm mostly in Juneau and Anchorage. But I can hear the music in my head and I know how the parts go. Okay, here's how the bass goes. Here's where where the horn should come in, all that. Although I don't write, I'm not classically trained. I just play it by ear. Interestingly, working for the Supreme with the Supreme Court on the Supreme Court is to me like a symphony of words, of music, because it's all about writing and getting it right, getting it in the right key, kind of parallel, or the right notes. You're refining it so the timing and the words are just right. And we're not just writing with, it's not just 5 justices that are writing. There is 5 justices, and that's really where the buck stops. But we each have 3 clerks who are also editing and help writing and help research and make sure we got it right. And when a good opinion comes out, it feels like it's something solid. And the way that a good song or music, it can be solid. It's like, it feels good. It feels right. It rings true. And even a dissent. So sometimes we don't agree. There's one of the justices or more, 1 or 2. No, I don't agree with the way that you're deciding this case. And as a principal, I respect you, but I can't agree. So I'm going to dissent. I'm going to write a disagreement. Even then, the music, when you have tension, that's good in music. And to the degree that dissent can help sharpen the points made in the majority opinion, the court's opinion, and to the degree that the court's opinion can help sharpen the dissent to really boil down, what are we really talking about here? It's beautiful. It's even with a dissent, there's harmony in the sense of not harmony in the sense of we always agree, but that we agree on the process, and the end goal is to make it to ring true and to have it clarity. Let's see. I think I've kind of gone into what I think makes leadership in Alaska and the Arctic unique or special, and that's pretty much what Justice Carney said. And kind of what I was talking about in Sitka is we have a very small, and I think thankfully small world here, a small community, big land, but small community. And that's amazing to me. I try to lure law clerks up here who maybe haven't been to Alaska and explain to them, you have a chance to be a relative. I mean, if you do something in the law or you build community, if you decide to build a therapeutic court, which I've engaged in Sitka, between the Sitka tribe and the state court. Now we have a joint jurisdiction tribal court in Sitka. You can see the effects of it. That we're small enough community, whether it's a victory or a loss or something that you build, you can see the upsides of it. Or if you make mistakes and you burn bridges, you can see the downside real quick. And so I'm echoing, I think, what Justice Carney was saying, or at least I'm trying to. I think what also makes us special is the blend of cultures we have. I mean, we have more cultures in this state than, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to say the whole United States, but it is a unique blend of course, our indigenous cultures, and then you have layered in, everything else after that, whether it's, Russian or in Western, and it's in the languages. It's fascinating. My leadership style, I think, is just rolling my sleeves up and getting in. And I tend to, if I'm in a job, I tend to want to know how to do it from the bottom up, not because I want to try to micromanage, but because I want to know how it all fits together. And if I do that, I will truly appreciate the work that people around me are doing and can do a better job myself, but not to micromanage. What challenges am I trying to, are we trying to address right now? I mean, I echo obviously just what Justice Carney said. That's a huge issue. And the Supreme Court Chief Justice is responsible for administering the court system. And so that's a taking care of a criminal backlog is a huge issue. You all have probably read some of those articles in the ADN. And we, as Justice Carney explained, are dealing with it. We're making progress too. I also work with Justice Carney and have for a long time on the Color of Justice program, which I hope some of you are familiar with. And Sitka has Mount Edgecombe, so we alternate Color of Justice. I think it's in odd years, it's in Sitka, and then even years, I believe it's in Anchorage. And some progress after some years, this most guess a year and a half ago now, at Color of Justice in Sitka at Mount Edgecombe, for the first time, to my knowledge, we had attorneys who came back to give presentations at Color of Justice who had been to Edgecombe and attended Color of Justice. And so for the kids, I mean, that was like payday for me to see. I mean, to say, hey, this is working. We're showing, we have positive proof that Color of Justice works because we have people, tribal members who have become attorneys who are now coming back, and the looks on the kids' faces to see, yeah, all right, good, Supreme Court Justice, when they see somebody who knows where they've been, done what they've done, looks like they look, it was just like fire. It was so amazing. But we have, I don't know, it's like 77 governor appointed judge positions. It's roughly that number. And then what's our indigenous population? I'm just guessing here. It varies 20%, something like that, maybe more. We have 0 Alaska Native judges. And to me, that is a big problem because our justice system does not begin to look like or reflect what our population is. And I just, the only thing, I mean, to do is like Color of Justice. It's like, yes, you can. Hey, we're going to go out there and support you. And we're going to encourage and work with you. And our various chambers for the Supreme Court and on the trial courts are doing outreach and encouraging more Alaska Native students to think about law school and careers in the law. And I think that that's a huge challenge because our democracy one of the 3 branches, the court system, is only as strong as our people's belief in it. And how can you have belief in a system if it doesn't even begin to represent who we are? Let's see. What advice would I give to others who are interested in becoming leaders in Alaska? I would echo what Justice Carney said. Follow your heart. You don't have to go you don't have to go to you don't have to go to Harvard like Justice Carney. You can go to Kansas. You don't have to be, you don't have to start out clerking for the Supreme Court. You could start out clerking for a tribal court. There are so many paths to leadership if you follow your heart. And in my heart, I did that, and I feel very satisfied with my career. I could end it today and be completely satisfied. So thank you for hearing me speak.
I appreciate your comments about the challenges you're facing and about sort of the small townness of Alaska and what makes justice in Alaska maybe different from the lower 48. And Justice Pate, I love the analogy of how writing opinions is like writing music. That was great. So they're willing to take questions from you all. Yush is going to monitor the webinar chat, and we'll read questions there. And then our student Kevin and I will run microphones to people here in Schaible. So don't be shy. Questions, comments for the justices?
Hi, Carol Gray. I teach in the pre-law program here in political science. I don't know if you're allowed to comment at all about the national scene. Perhaps not, because you might have cases come before you, but I'm particularly interested in your thoughts about separation of powers issues that are coming up at the national level, and also about conflicts of interest. The recent executive order saying that companies basically can bribe foreign governments, the emoluments clause. Are you able to weigh in at all on separation of powers between the executive branch and Congress?
I will give you a version of the not really an answer that I gave to the legislature yesterday, which is I've now survived an entire month as chief of the Alaska Supreme Court. I'm just getting a handle on what I do here. So I wouldn't presume to say how a different court should address its issues. That said, separation of powers is a fundamental principle of our democracy in the United States, in Alaska. The judicial branch is much smaller than legislatures or the president or the governor, but we are a co-equal branch and we play an important role. And the rule of law is critical to the survival of a functioning democracy. Justice Pate, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, that was you hit the nail on the head. And the only thing I would add is that the rule of, and this I think is consistent with what Justice Carney just said, is that courts, we don't have police people, we don't have any enforcers. Our authority depends on the people's trust and respect for the system. And I think that the answer that I can give is that build community, get out there and show, I guess, the in the sense that if we are building community and reaching across even those that we might think they might not agree with us, that whatever views you have, it will make us stronger. And that when stressful times come, that if we have community, we'll look to each other rather than to just ourselves. And I think the rule of law depends on us coming together as a community. Like we share things. We're stronger together. Where it seems a lot in society today is pulling us to be individuals, to making just relying on ourselves, or in isolation, or the power of one person, or our iPhones making us kind of go down little rabbit holes. And so I think that building community helps make the rule of law stronger, and that's something we can do. It doesn't have to be about politics.
We have a couple of questions from Zoom.
Yeah, we'll start with Gretchen's question. Gretchen's asking, when you're working with early or mid-career lawyers, what do you look for in terms of leadership potential? I think both of you.
Justice Pate?
Well, Justice Carney's got much more experience than I do with this. But I guess I look for someone who's not afraid to ask questions, someone who's mature enough to be willing, not to be afraid to ask what might be a silly question. So it takes both, I guess, some humility and curiosity. So I look for that. I look for how they treat others. And you know, smarts are really important, but I think those other qualities are as or more important.
And I only have a little bit to add. The place where judges and justices work most closely with sort of early and sometimes later in their career lawyers are when we hire law clerks, when we hire what are basically our research assistants. We are generally hiring them right after they get out of law school so that clerkship becomes similar to the medical profession's internship, but legal careers don't require any kind of internship. You can graduate and go open your practice and maybe you make a lot of money and maybe nobody will come in your door. So we hire law clerks. Our selfish motive is we have too much work to do ourselves, so we have other people to assist us. But we also do it as sort of a professional obligation to the next generation of lawyers. And as judges and justices get more experienced in working with law clerks, we kind of get a better idea of who we think will work better. One of the things that I tell all of the law clerks is they must work as a team. For a little Supreme Court in the middle of nowhere, we are really kind of snobby and picky about our law clerks. So we're really looking for people who are really smart, who have generally worked on law reviews in different journals so that they've got experience reading and writing, which is what we do. Our job as justices, as opposed to the kind of judge you think of doing a trial, we're much more like academics. We're reading and writing and thinking and studying all the time. Because we have we've got 3 people on this team with me and my assistant, and we have so much work, I do not want to be bothered refereeing about, I write better, I'm smarter, you know. And I also tell them, I don't care, I am. Right? On this team, I write better and I'm the smartest. But I have found that the people that tend to be best able to work cooperatively are not the people who started at kindergarten and kept going without a break until they graduated from law school. So I tend to look for people who have some experience, who have done something, and I'm not talking about something in the law. One of our colleagues was in the Peace Corps in a small African country for a while, just something that breaks that constant get up, go to school, go to bed, get up, go to school. And I think that it helps me. I think I get better research assistance. And I certainly think it helps with the ability to learn to work cooperatively.
We have a few more. I'll read one more and then see if there's any in the room. So this is a question from Tracy. As the Alaska Supreme Court considers issues of healthcare and community well-being, how can the court support the expansion of hospice care services and ensure that elders in our state receive the compassionate end-of-life care they deserve, especially in rural and underserved communities?
That's not really our thing. But if we only issue opinions and decisions when someone brings us a case and asks us a question. So if we get a case where people are trying to figure out, you know, what the regulations say about whether people who are in small villages are entitled to a certain type of care, we will decide that. But we can't just kind of decide we need to look at regulations because we don't like them or we think they're unfair.
Hi, my name is Randy Lewis. I'm a clinical social worker, and I worked as a mediator for about 20 years, contract mediator for the court system. And Justice Carney, you mentioned during your presentation to the legislature that you mentioned that restorative justice was one of the alternatives to speed things up, speed cases moving through the court system. And Justice Pate, I could see the enthusiasm in your description of tribal courts, which I think is a form of restorative justice, was very obvious. At any rate, my question is, what specifically is being done to encourage the use of restorative justice as an alternative to black robes?
You know, we can't really require anybody to not come to court. So a lot of what we do is communicate that these things are available. One of the alternatives, not exactly that restorative justice, but in divorce cases, there are a large number of people split up, fight about custody, and they don't either want a lawyer or they can't afford a lawyer. The court system has a program where people who are going through these very difficult times and very difficult decisions are told about this called an early resolution program. And they will get help from volunteer lawyers to sit down and try and figure out a written plan of who gets the kids when. Is there child support involved? Which parent has to pay? Does either parent have to pay? And if they can't reach an agreement, there are also mediators who can be involved to help them sort it out in a way that is going to keep them from going to court. My husband, who's here with me, ran the court system's child custody investigators office here for a long time. And one of the things that they did very successfully was those types of, not quite mediation, more sort of mediation with a push. They called them directed settlement, which was more kind of reality check. You may want this, but the judge is never going to give you that. So how about we move to the next thing? And the whole drive behind all of that is if you and your partner are deciding yourselves what happens to your kids, it's almost certainly going to be better for the kids. And it's also more likely that you can live with it because you came to this agreement. You don't have someone that you've never met until a week ago in a black dress saying, okay, you only get to see the kids on the weekends and you get to pay for the privilege. You know, people, it naturally just rankles right from the get-go. The restorative justice program that Jeff May runs is much more reminiscent of the kind of circle sentencing. And they handled, I was full of numbers yesterday, but they handled close to 140 misdemeanor cases last year. So they don't, the courts don't have to.
I would add that I look at restorative justice as kind of a continuum, and I think we're just at the baby step stage. I think there's so much more we could do. The role that I understand that we have, and that especially Chief Justice Carney has, the administrator, as the head of the administration for the court system, we can influence, encourage it to happen. We can't force it, but we can encourage it to happen. It takes a lot of trust. I'm sure, as you know, restorative justice it's a little bit of a leap of faith, and it takes trust for the participants to engage in it because you're making yourself vulnerable. That's what makes it beautiful when it works. I have in Southeast, the last 9 months, I haven't done as much as I would like, but I like to go into small villages, Hoona, Heidelberg. And I know Justice Carney, Chief Justice Carney, has gone into New Alto and all sorts of small villages up north and meet with tribal leaders, municipal leaders, and talk to them about opportunities. We have a Rule 11E, I think it is, which encourages or creates a pathway or acknowledges the ability of communities to participate in sentencing meaningfully. And again, that's an example of a baby step, but I think that once communities really start, if we really start getting that going, we can take the next step after that to where it maybe will be realistic to have more in-depth rather than just community participation, kind of look at if that's really working. I think once we get there, our eyes will be open and we'll have a vantage point. We'll be able to see over the horizon to where the next step is. So I think we're just at the early stage of it, at least in my mind. I hope we are, because I think there's so much further we can go.
Hello, my name is Jeff Thompson. I'm a 2015 graduate of the Justice Department. I have a question for Chief Justice Carney and then also a separate question for Justice Pate, if I might. For Chief Justice Carney, in light of the new administration's basically reopening offshore drilling and the expectation that ANWR is going to be part of this, are you going to require those tribes that put in arguments before the state Supreme Court to block that? Are you going to require them to put in new arguments, or can you represent the same arguments before the same Supreme Court that they did initially?
A lot of that doesn't actually come to us because a lot of it's not state issues, right? ANWR's federal. If we had a case and it was dismissed or withdrawn for some reason, we would anticipate that the parties would file new briefs. You know, if it's exactly the same issue, they tear off the cover and put on a new cover, you know, we're not going to know the difference.
Okay.
But a lot of, you know, when you talk about the administration, it's federal, and that's an entirely separate court system. We sort of run parallel. You know, there's the federal system, there's the state system, and there are tribal courts. And they're just three systems that are running simultaneously, but we rarely overlap.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Justice Pate, I have a question for you. You mentioned the word sovereignty when you were talking about tribal courts. I am a member of the Tomoke tribe of the Western Shoshone Nation of the Lower 48. We have sovereignty because we're recognized by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. My argument with Mike Deku and Jeff May has always been, here in Alaska, there are no sovereignties as far as tribes go because they get a dividend. I've always argued if you want to have sovereignty, you give up the dividend. You can't have the cake and the ice cream both. What are your thoughts on that?
You mean the dividend, like the permanent fund dividend?
No, I mean a royalty dividend from the oil, like Doyen, for example.
Oh, like
And the other ones,
and
like I said, I
corporate-
know people from the Southeast that got quite a few dividends and make quite a bit of money from those oil dividends.
So you're talking about ANCSA corporations, then dividends.
Right.
Okay. Well, I think that the Alaska Supreme Court, Chief Justice, if you correct me if I'm wrong, has recognized the sovereignty of tribes. It's our precedent. It's our rule. We've recognized that the tribal governments the sovereignty doesn't come from the federal government. It doesn't come from the state government. It comes from the people, and it's a power that they've always had. So it arises separate from and apart from whatever happens with Alaska Native corporations. I would encourage you to think about it. You know, for me as a non-native, I don't get ANCSA corporation dividends, but I do have stocks. I couldn't name what they are. My wife could, but I can't. But then I also participate as a citizen. And how I might decide to participate as a citizen, how I might vote, how I might act in the government is different, even though I'm the same person, is different how I might invest my stocks. I might own money in Coca-Cola and GE. And then that behavior, though, that interaction with that corporation doesn't define me as how I participate as a citizen in the government. So I look at the government and business. Hopefully they work together, but they are separate. So I would say that interesting question, but I think our precedent, our rules, the decisions we've made in the past have already answered that, and that there is tribal sovereignty in Alaska. Justice Carney, do I have that right?
Yes, you have it right, but the issue that sort of underlies that is tribal sovereignty in Alaska doesn't look like tribal sovereignty outside Alaska. Because to a very large extent, tribal sovereignty outside Alaska is defined by reference to the reservation. Tribes exert their control on the reservation, but not off the reservation. And we've got 227 separate tribes that, except with one, kind of 1.5 exceptions, they don't have land. So we have a number of cases that talk about tribal sovereignty, but it talks more in terms of things that are essential to and inherent in their need to govern themselves. And the place that it comes up most often is tribes clearly have sovereignty over their children. And that gives tribes the ability to decide things like child custody.
So given Alaska's legal framework and the evolving role of tribal sovereignty, how do you view the potential for Alaska Native communities to exercise greater self-governance? I'm from Utqiagvik, and one of our core values is avoidance of conflict, which has fostered harmony, but can sometimes lead to withdrawal rather than resolution. From your perspective, how can legal systems, both tribal and state, support approaches that encourage engagement and repair rather than disengagement?
So, one very, I think, practical way that I've been attempting to do that, and not just me, a group of us in Southeast, state tribal judges meetings, and we have them about twice a year, and we rotate between one dinner the state hosts, and the next dinner the tribe host. We go back and forth, and you're in person. The location rotates. So far, we've had them in Juneau and Ketchikan. We're going to have the next one in Sitka. And what it is, it's both, it doesn't sound that fancy, but I think it's really important. We sit down, we share food, and as judges or tribal court administrators or whoever the tribal designee is for the dinner, we talk, and we talk about issues. We don't talk about cases. We talk about systems. We talk about how our systems are interacting and, you know, what challenges you might be facing. But more important, but even not more important, more basic than that is now state judges are talking and tribal judges are talking together, and they're people, and that I can call a state judge, when I was a trial judge, I could call a state judge down in, I don't know, Kentucky, and automatically, because I was a state judge and the judge that I'm calling is a judge, maybe about a child custody case, there's an automatic connection. There's automatic respect. There's automatic kind of a relationship that just kind of springs up. I've done that dozens of times. The same is not always true when a tribal judge or a state judge calls a tribal judge or a tribal judge calls a state judge. And there's just, there's an unfamiliarity. And so these dinners, at least in my mind, are helping to, again, build community, build relationships. And so far we've had one or two very concrete examples of systemic issues. We didn't try to address them at the dinner. We just identified them and kind of, you can point, maybe you need to go in that direction. And they, at best I know, they've resolved. At our most recent meeting in Ketchikan was just a month or so ago. We drafted up a draft, an organizational document of our purpose, what our parameters are for discussions, how do we keep it focused on systemic issues as opposed to individual cases, those sorts of things. And I'm going to present it hopefully soon to the Supreme Court, and our side and the tribal governments in Southeast are taking it back to their tribal councils. And so I see that as a very concrete, humble, kind of modest, but I think a very important step moving forward.
Okay, we have 2 more questions online and then we'll go back to the room. There is an anonymous question for someone. They say, I'm in my 30s and have a career, financial responsibilities, and I'm considering going to law school. Do you have any tips for maintaining financial stability while pursuing a law degree? I'm hearing that most folks suggest giving law school your full attention.
I think it's difficult when you have real life responsibilities to go back to school in any way. And the American Bar Association for a long time required law students to go there for 3 years. Increasingly, there are law schools that offer partially online or just about all online, except that the American Bar Association requires some amount of in-person, on-campus stuff. Those sorts of options, I think, keep the cost down, but the cost of law school is really, it's kind of terrifying.
Could I ask you just to repeat the very first part of the question? It was, I couldn't hear, it was something about disabilities and I couldn't quite hear what it was.
Oh no, they're saying that they're, in their 30s, they have a career and financial responsibilities, but they're considering going
financial
to law school.
responsibilities. I would say that some of my best clerks haven't come from expensive law schools. Yes, law schools are expensive, but and that now they're law schools now are looking at more and more, I think Sue alluded to this, kind of remote attendance. So that might make it somewhat affordable. There are law schools that have evening programs. That means they instead of it takes another semester or a year to get through it, but it kind of as far as the workload goes, it helps smooth it out because there's non-traditional students, meaning those people that have families or jobs during the day. There's schools that accommodate that. Also, the more mature you are, I was not very mature. I was still, I think, I was 26 and my brain had barely formed as a man. And I found that the more mature students, the students who were in their 30s, it just came so much easier. They had the real life experience that Justice Carney was talking about, for that we look for in our clerks. It works in law school too, really well. I mean, there's just, so I think I would encourage you, the person who was talking about the law school, is look into it. I think you can look for a law school that fits you. Don't fit into a law school.
Next one's from Elizabeth. So Alaska has in many cases increased protections for individual rights to privacy. Has a case ever challenged your ideas on that individual right to privacy? And then a sub question is, have you ever changed your mind on a ruling you made?
Jude?
I'll let you take the right to privacy there, Sue.
You are correct. We have a stronger explicit right to privacy. And not surprisingly, where that comes up frequently is women's reproductive health. The Alaska courts have consistently upheld that because our Constitution says a right to privacy, and we, the Supreme Court, have always interpreted that to mean woman gets to choose and other people don't get to intrude into that because it's very private. Courts are required to apply the law. Judges are ethically forbidden from deciding the things that feel comfortable or make them happy or they know will not make their friends mad. We have to just decide it on the facts and the law. And this particular issue, as everybody knows, raises very, very strong and very, very polarized feelings. But our job is to make that call. I personally wrote the last Alaska Supreme Court opinion that addresses abortion rights. I did that not very long before my name appeared on the ballot. And when people opposed my retention, that was the reason. You know, I'm talking to you and now I'm chief, so obviously I was retained. But we know that happens, and people are entitled to their opinions, whether I agree with them, whether I don't agree with them, and whether they agree with me or not. But our opinions say what the law is.
I would address the second part of the question. Have I ever changed my mind as a judge and or justice? Yes. When we get a case, it comes to us, we read the briefs, we have one of our law clerks drafts some memos, we have another, like have an objective view, hopefully, of the case. And then sometimes we hear oral arguments. The parties come in after we've read the briefs and they talk to us more about it and we ask questions. And then we go into conference. The five of us sit, just the five of us, nothing's being recorded. Nobody else is there, just us. And that is the first time that we've heard what each other think about the case. We don't talk about the cases beforehand. And so I used to think that was pretty odd. It was like, why wouldn't you talk about it? That's the first thing you want to do is find out what's right. But the longer I've been on the court, the more I see value in everybody working with their clerks and doing their best to drill down and find out, try to make sense of this the best they can. And so I've come into conference a number of times with what I thought was right, or I had it figured out, and presented my my position or my understanding to the other justices. And I've had justices, including Justice Carney, convince me to the exact opposite direction, and convince me, like going back to the music analogy, I was not playing the right note. I was hitting the wrong chord there. Sometimes it's just a small change. Other times it's it's a 180, it's a spin. And so fortunately though, once whatever opinions or I've written and they've been released out to the public, I fortunately haven't had one that I think I've made the wrong call, but that comes after going through the process I've described to you, including the wisdom of 5 instead of just 1.
And thank you both very much. This has been a really enlightening talk. I'm grateful for you all being here. My name is Nicholas. I'm a PhD student here. What came to mind to me while you were talking, I was thinking about the relatively recent Held versus State of Montana case that was the climate change litigation that didn't have any formal penalties associated with the ultimate ruling, but kind of set a precedent for the way that climate change could be litigated going into the future. And thinking about Alaska as especially vulnerable to climate change and its pace, I was curious what your perspective is on the litigatory environment moving forward, if the state of Alaska is kind of like vulnerable to things like that, or the corporations that operate in the state, and what you see the future of those kind of lawsuits being.
So we have issued an opinion on that same topic. There have been maybe half a dozen similar lawsuits brought by a nonprofit group whose name is something like For the Children's Future. They brought one to us. And in 2018 or 2019, 3 members of the Alaska Supreme Court said there's no real right to, the term they were using was a right to a livable environment, or an environment that sustains life. The majority of the court said, roughly, that's a great idea, but there's nothing in our laws, in our Constitution, that guarantees that. 2 members of the court said, there is. We think there is. We think we should recognize it. And the justice that wrote that said, and we know that doesn't turn into a particular penalty or require a particular policy, but it inches the ball toward the goal line to a time when something may change, similar to the early kind of civil rights decisions. It said, you know, you can't discriminate. It didn't say, and so do these things.
What is the strength of that precedent in terms of that dissenting or?
Dissents are always, and then the dissent said this, but the majority is the controlling opinion. The name of the opinion is Sagoonic, Sagoonick.
Thank you.
So both of you talked about sort of following your heart, and I think Judge Pate, you referenced Judge Carney as being the sort of conscience. And I'm just curious, how do both of you come to your sort of conclusion about what you're doing being right, you know? And like, how do you, has that changed over time, over the course of your career? And what would you say to someone who is thinking about going down a similar route as you in that realm?
Can I ask a question? What do you mean by what's doing right? Do you mean living right, acting right, or do you mean making the right decision as a justice or a judge, or all of it?
I mean, in a sort of moral sense, outside of like judging a case, right, which I know is supposed to be legal, but like your whole career path, you know, and that your path in life overall, and like where do you get that from? If you're referencing, because both of you talked about following your heart and being Justice Justice Carney being the conscience, right, of the court, and I'm just curious, you know, how do you come to that idea?
Sue?
You know, to be perfectly honest, I pray a lot. I pray for wisdom and guidance. I clearly can be wrong. Feel free to talk to my husband later.
Never.
But we do our best, you know. As lawyers and judges, we have ethical obligations to follow the law. And the way the law works is we look at the written law, right? This is the statute that says you can't drive drunk, right? It's written out, we read the words, generally they make sense. And then we look at the cases that have applied it. And if all of the cases say in this situation, that's against the law, and we really can't just say, we changed our mind, right? We can't just say, well, that was wrong. Once in a great while, if we conclude that what we said then seemed to make sense, but the world has changed and now this is harmful, then we can go back and revisit it and maybe change it. And if we do that, we'll say that's why. We thought we had it right. The world has changed. Now it's clear that this is hurting more than it's helping. And we feel we have an obligation to right that wrong, basically.
I think where I got my sense, which I think everybody does this from your early age, is from my parents and my relatives about what was right. And what there's a couple principles. One is if you can, what you're doing would be good for the generations after you, then it's probably more likely right. If you're only focused on yourself, like in front of your nose, maybe not so much, maybe. That's a big one, looking ahead, and not just for yourself. So if you're thinking about starting something, the things that I have done that I feel were right were ones that I didn't necessarily, I wasn't going to see any personal direct benefit from it, money or what have you. And some of those things I did, whether it was helping set up the public interest law project in my law school, or other things where I didn't see any direct benefit that took years. The color of justice. it took years to see that bear fruit, at least from in my, really, I mean, concretely. But that was done without any notion of, at least in my mind, of personal gain. It was looking forward 10, 20 years. So that would be my advice.
Got a question up in the back.
Okay. We have one here. Let's do one here and then one online, and then we'd actually like the students to take a picture with you before you leave.
Oh, sure.
Hi, my name is Amiko Newman, and I'm an engineering student at UAF. I wanted to ask about education and funding for that, and also if women are going to lose the right to vote in the Constitution, because I don't really know how federal politics work. But there's just a lot happening and changing in the federal government right now with all the executive orders. And I thought that was really interesting with like how the political climate is shifting so rapidly in some ways. And I know that like the states can interpret things, you know, because, you know, I don't know, state laws and stuff like that. I don't know, I'm an engineering major, but really what I care about is if all the schools are going to close down like in Alaska and if there's still going to be education, because I do a lot of community outreach as the president of the Society of Women Engineers. And I just want a job. I want to be an engineer. I want to give back to my community. And I want to make sure that people have opportunities and that, you know, our Alaskan workforce can be strong. And I may be a woman, but I still want to work and I have a lot to offer and I'll work very hard. And so I just kind of want to know if there's going to be structure still in place and if you think that there's a viable future for young women engineers in Alaska today and like kind of how, I don't know, you seem to be relatively important with like all the rulings that you do. And so if you could tell me a little bit about your job and how that could influence the outcome of these very difficult issues I've just brought to you. Yeah, I'd love to hear about it. And my name's Amiko. And also I want a minor in environmental politics. So I'll probably email you in case you need somebody to like get you coffee and stuff. I'm really good at that. So.
It's going to be hard to deliver coffee to Juneau.
I'm from Petersburg. I
Oh
love
yeah, down in my
Juneau.
neighborhood. Good.
Yeah, yeah. My dad's Scott Newman. He is a master guide and a Bushman pilot. My dad's really good at flying planes and stuff. I'm really scared of them, and bears. But my dad, like, I don't know, he's really solid. He taught me how to think. So anyway, I was really excited that there's like really important people here. And oh, my dad's on the borough board for Petersburg. So honestly, maybe you guys will have to like interact or something. But he's really chill. So thank you.
Yeah. I certainly hope that education exists and you have a job and that as a woman, and I hope you continue to be able to have women engineers. We can't, one of the things about separation of powers is we have different powers and different abilities, and any kind of policy kind of thing. Are we going to pay for education? That's left to the legislature. So in the state, it's the state legislature. In the country, it's Congress. We would be violating the separation of powers if we just said, we're going to set a policy that requires so much money for funding. What we can do is sort of respond if you become convinced that all the funding has gone away and you sue the state legislature and say, you need to pay so the kids can be educated. That lawsuit would go to trial and then probably someone in the trial would then appeal it to us. So eventually we could say, you know, yes, you're right, what they're doing violates the Alaska Constitution's requirement that public education be available and funded. But we have to wait for that to come to us.
The only thing I would add is maybe look at the Molly Hooch case. It's how old is that, Sue? How long ago was that?
Late 70s, maybe. Hooch is Hootch, I think.
And there was a lawsuit brought about the villages, the rural communities not having schools. And it was about the constitutional right to have some public schooling. And so, and about women, hello, you have I know it's not an engineer, but you have a Chief Justice of your state Supreme Court who's female. We have a majority, 3 of the people on our Supreme Court are female, 2 males. That's the first time it's happened in Alaska. And I think for the first time, the majority of the state legislature, House of Reps maybe,
House
is
of Representatives.
House of Representatives female. So I understand your concern. It is valid. I hear you, but there's some good things to hope for.
Okay, one last question online from Frank Bold. Justice Carney, has there been consideration given to standing up an intermediate court of appeals for civil cases before they got to the Alaska Supreme Court? If so, why or why not?
I don't think there has. I don't know the exact answer why. My guess is because we're still a pretty small state. You know, Washington State has 4 or 5 separate intermediate courts of appeals in different parts of the state, because their Supreme Court would be overwhelmed if everybody all the time could come directly to the Supreme Court. The Alaska Constitution gives everybody the right to an appeal. And it's everybody. It's ConocoPhillips and some other oil company if they're fighting over who gets this particular oil field. It's people getting divorced. It's 2 neighbors who are mad because someone backed into the fence. If all of those go to trial and the person who loses that trial is upset enough, it can come directly to us. There's no screening. The US Supreme Court picks and chooses how many cases it does. And they do something like 50 cases a year. We do something like 225 cases a year because everything comes, except criminal cases. All the criminal cases go to the Court of Appeals. And once in a while, they come up to us. But that's the only time we get to pick. If someone, generally it's someone in jail who is unhappy, they appeal their conviction to the Court of Appeals. If that conviction is affirmed, that person almost always asks us if we would please take another appeal. And that's the only time we can say no.
I would just add that I don't have a fraction, well, I do have a fraction of the experience of Justice Carney, but the workload to me is immense, and I constantly feeling like I could spend more time on these very important cases, on these most important issues, and it would be helpful to maybe have an intermediate civil court for some issues at least. But I think the real fly in the ointment for that, I think there's a good reason to do it because I think we do a better job, but I guess flat out money. We don't have enough money for our schools, all these, you hear about, we don't have enough money. The courthouses, there's courthouses all around Alaska that are in grave need of repair. So I think it's money, and I wouldn't take, if there was more money, I think it should maybe go to other places first before it goes to an intermediate court. Chief Justice Carney and I will just have to keep working hard.
Okay, thank you both so much for answering everyone's questions. If you all would join me in thanking Chief Justice Carney and Justice Pate